A poor maid fell asleep in a billionaire's bed. She was 19, invisible, and exhausted, just another ghost pushing a cart through Manhattan's most expensive hotel. He was 32, untouchable, and trapped by a grandfather's cruel will. When Isabella Hayes fell asleep in James Drake's bed, she didn't just make a mistake. She stumbled into a bargain that would blur every line between desperation and desire, between contract and connection, between the lie they agreed to tell and the truth neither could deny. Hey there, my beautiful family and friends, welcome back. If you're loving the vibes and don't want to be missing out on our great stories, then don't forget to subscribe and do well to drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. Now, let's continue. Isabella Hayes had learned to measure her life in numbers that never added up. $287.43 in her checking account. $1,800 rent due in 3 days. $340 for her grandmother's insulin, the real kind, not the watered-down substitute that left Grandma Rose shaking and pale by evening. $200 for Marcus's community college textbooks, because her 15-year-old brother was too brilliant to let poverty steal his future the way it had tried to steal hers. The mathematics of poverty were always crystal clear: you could work yourself to the bone and still come up short. Always short. Always scrambling. Always one emergency away from catastrophe. At 19 years old, Isabella understood this better than she understood anything else. The text came at 11:47 a.m., just as she pushed her cleaning cart toward the service elevator at the Regency Grand. Landlord says Friday or we're out. Your brother collapsed at school again. No insulin left. I'm scared, baby. The typos were worse than the message. Grandma Rose had been an English teacher before arthritis forced her into early retirement. She never made typos. Unless she was terrified. Hayes. Mrs. Chin materialized like a designer-clad ghost. Presidential Suite 4201. Guests checked out at 6 a.m. Deep clean required. Can you handle it unsupervised? The presidential suite. The penthouse. 42nd floor. Isabella had only cleaned it twice before, always under Mrs. Chen's hawk-like supervision. Yes, ma'am. Of course. The suite was obscene in its luxury, floor-to-ceiling windows framing Manhattan like a purchased painting, furniture that cost more than most people's cars, silence so thick it felt like wealth itself. Isabella worked methodically through the living room, kitchen, bathrooms. By 3:15 p.m., her lower back was screaming from 3 double shifts in a row. She saved the master bedroom for last. The bed wasn't just furniture, it was a promise. A California king with a tufted cream leather headboard, sheets with a thread count that probably had its own stock portfolio. The scent of expensive cologne lingered, woody, commanding, the smell of a man who'd never worried about rent in his life. When Isabella leaned over to strip it, her lower back spasmed. Sharp. Vicious. She sat on the edge. Just for a second. Just to breathe. The mattress seemed to exhale beneath her, welcoming her weight with the enthusiasm of something that understood exhaustion. Before she could think, Isabella lay back against the pillows. Just for a minute. 1 minute to rest. The pillow cradled her head like something precious. Her phone buzzed again, probably her grandmother, probably more bad news, but Isabella's eyes were already heavy, her body surrendering to comfort it had no right to feel. Just 60 seconds. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was the afternoon sun painting golden stripes across the ceiling, and somewhere in her fading consciousness, she knew this was a mistake. She just didn't know it would change everything. The sound of a door closing yanked Isabella from dreams of paying bills and saving her family. Her eyes snapped open. Late afternoon light. Horror crashed through her system like ice water. No. No, no, no. She grabbed her phone, 4:13 p.m. She'd been asleep for 4 hours. Footsteps in the living room. Not the shuffle of housekeeping, these were decisive, purposeful, the steps of someone who'd never apologized for existing. The bedroom door opened. The man in the doorway made the expensive suit look accidental. Mid-30s, sharp jaw, slate gray eyes. He looked exhausted in a way that expensive skincare couldn't hide, the exhaustion of someone who owned too much and slept too little. But it was his expression that terrified her, not anger, not shock, but something far more dangerous. Curiosity. "Well," James Drake said, his voice quiet and measured, "this is unexpected." Isabella scrambled to her feet, words dying in her throat. She was caught. Finished. "I can explain," she managed, voice cracking. "I was cleaning and I sat down for 1 second in my bed." He set down his briefcase with careful precision. "You sat down in my bed." "Please don't fire me," Isabella whispered. "I need this job. My grandmother, she's sick, and my brother." "How long have you worked here?" 8 months. "And how many times have you fallen asleep in a guest's bed?" "Never." "I swear, this was the first time. I was just so tired in." James walked to the window, hands in his pockets, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. The silence stretched like a wire pulled too tight. "Isabella Hayes," he said finally, reading her name tag. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes, sir." "You're James Drake. You own Drake Industries." He turned back to face her, and something in his expression made her pulse quicken. "I solve problems. Specifically, problems that other people think are impossible. That's how I built my company. That's how I became," he gestured vaguely at the suite, "this." Isabella didn't understand where he was going, but every instinct screamed that she should be very, very careful. "Right now," James continued, "I have a problem. A very specific, very complicated problem. Do you want to know what my problem is?" She nodded, too frightened to speak. James smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I need a wife." The words hung in the air like smoke. What?" "Not a real wife," he clarified. "A temporary one. 6 months, maybe less. There's a clause in my grandfather's will, outdated, ridiculous, but ironclad. To access my full inheritance and maintain control of the company, I need to be married before my 33rd birthday. Which is in 4 weeks." Isabella's mind reeled. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you fell asleep in my bed." His eyes locked onto hers. "Because you're desperate, I can see it in your eyes, hear it in your voice. Because you need money and I need a solution, and maybe, just maybe, we can help each other." "You want me to pretend to be your wife?" "I want to hire you for a role," James corrected. 6 months. You'll move into my penthouse, attend events, play the part. In exchange, I'll pay you $500,000. Plus, all your grandmother's medical bills covered, your brother's college tuition handled, your rent paid through the end of the lease." Isabella felt like the floor had dropped away. $500,000. You'd be an employee, Isabella, with a contract, benefits, and an exit strategy. After 6 months, we divorce quietly, you walk away with enough money to start whatever life you want, and I keep my company. He pulled out a business card, held it out. "Or you can leave right now, and I'll call down to housekeeping and have you terminated for sleeping on the job. Your choice." "Why me?" she whispered. For the first time, something real flickered across James Drake's face, something almost like loneliness. "Because you're not from my world," he said quietly. "Because you won't want to stay in it. Because every woman I know would either sell me out to the tabloids or actually fall in love with the lifestyle. You'll take the money and run, which is exactly what I need." "I need an answer by tomorrow," James said, heading for the door. "Meet me here, at the same time, if you're interested. Otherwise, forget this conversation happened." He paused in the doorway. "Oh, and Isabella? You might want to find your other shoe. Cinderella stories only work if you leave something behind intentionally." Isabella stood alone in the billionaire's bedroom, a business card burning in her hand like a lottery ticket to either salvation or destruction. Outside the window, Manhattan glittered with possibilities and threats, and somewhere in the Bronx, her grandmother was waiting for a miracle that might arrive wearing a wedding ring and a lie. Isabella didn't sleep that night. She lay in her narrow bed staring at the water-stained ceiling while the business card sat on her nightstand, its gold embossing catching the streetlight. $500,000. Can't sleep either? Grandma Rose appeared in her doorway at 2 a.m., wrapped in her faded bathrobe. Isabella told her everything. About falling asleep in the suite, about James Drake's impossible offer, about the contract that would either save them or destroy her. Grandma Rose listened without interrupting. When Isabella finished, silence settled like a heavy blanket. "That's a lot of money," Grandma Rose said finally. "Yes. You know what your mother would say. That money earned through deception isn't worth having. And your father would say that providing for your family is the most honest work there is." Grandma Rose smiled sadly. "I say that you're 19 years old, and the fact that you're even considering this breaks my heart. But I also know that pride is expensive, and we can't afford it anymore." The next morning, Isabella stood outside Presidential Suite 4201 at 9:47 a.m., wearing her best dress and her most terrified expression. She knocked twice. The door opened immediately. James looked different in morning light, less exhausted, more focused. Behind him, the suite had been transformed into a law office. Papers spread across tables, lawyers reviewing documents. "You came," James said, and Isabella couldn't tell if he was surprised or relieved. For the next 3 hours, Isabella read every word of the 67-page contract while her court-appointed lawyer explained the terms. 6 months of marriage. Public appearances required. Separate bedrooms. No romantic involvement, strictly professional. $500,000 paid in full upon completion, plus all medical and educational expenses covered immediately. The penalties were severe. Breaking the contract early meant returning everything. Selling the story would result in legal action that would destroy her. "If I do this," Isabella said slowly, "I want one more thing in the contract." James raised an eyebrow. "You're negotiating? You said this was business." Isabella met his eyes. "After 6 months, I want a recommendation letter. A real one. Because $500,000 won't last forever, and I'm going to need a real career when this is over." Something shifted in James's expression. "Respect, maybe." "Done," he said. "I'll add a job offer clause too." Isabella picked up the pen. Her hand trembled as she signed her name, making her, at least on paper, Mrs. James Drake. "Welcome to my life," James said softly. "Welcome to mine," she replied. The first lie Isabella told was to her grandmother 2 hours after signing the contract. "I met someone," Isabella said, the words feeling like stones in her mouth. "His name is James. He's successful. Kind. We met at the hotel." She delivered the carefully crafted story. They'd been talking for weeks, had fallen quickly in love, and he'd proposed. His grandfather had just died, and the inheritance came with a timeline for marriage. "You're sure about this?" Grandma Rose asked. "Because baby girl, marriage is serious." "I'm sure," Isabella lied, and felt a piece of her soul crack. 2 days later, James came to dinner at their cramped Bronx apartment. He arrived punctual, bearing wine and flowers, dressed down in jeans that still somehow looked expensive. He charmed them all. Told Marcus he was going to change the world with his brilliance. Promised Grandma Rose he would treat Isabella with the respect she deserved. Explained the rushed timeline with just the right mix of romance and pragmatism. "You hurt my granddaughter," Grandma Rose said, placing her hand on James's, "and I don't care how many billions you have. I will find a way to make you regret it." "I would expect nothing less," James replied. As Isabella walked him to the door after dinner, he said quietly, "Your family is remarkable. And you're protecting them. I understand that. Are you protecting someone too?" Isabella asked. "Is that what this is really about?" James's expression shuddered. "It's about not losing what my grandfather built. About honoring his legacy." It wasn't really an answer, but Isabella didn't push. The morning of the wedding, Isabella woke up at 5 a.m. in her childhood bedroom for the last time as Isabella Hayes. By 10 a.m., she was transformed, hairstyled in an intricate updo, makeup subtle but perfect, wearing an ivory silk gown that had cost more than her parents' actual wedding. "You look just like your mama," Grandma Rose said, crying. She'd be so proud. She'd see through this in seconds, Isabella thought. She'd know I'm walking toward a lie. The venue was a waterfront estate in the Hamptons. 50 guests, white roses everywhere, a string quartet playing something classical. It was beautiful, perfect, and absolutely terrifying. James stood at the altar looking genuinely nervous, one hand fidgeting with his watch, his jaw tight with tension. When his eyes met hers, something flickered across his face. Relief, maybe. Recognition of their shared terror. They were both drowning. At least they were drowning together. The ceremony passed in a blur. Vows they'd memorized but didn't mean. Rings that symbolized a contract, not a commitment. And then the moment Isabella had been dreading. "You may kiss your bride." James's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "We've got this," he whispered. Then he kissed her. It was supposed to be for show. Brief, chaste, appropriate. But something happened in that moment of contact, some recognition of shared vulnerability. The kiss lingered, deepened slightly, became something more than performance. When they pulled apart, James had a tech conference, and Carolyn insisted Isabella come, show they were solid, that she wasn't just arm candy for New York events. Isabella played her part perfectly at the conference, but something had shifted since Thursday night. James was more distant, more careful to maintain physical space. "You two seem tense," Carolyn observed. "Did something happen?" "Nothing happened," Isabella lied. That evening, back in their hotel suite, the facade finally cracked. "You can stop pretending now," James said, loosening his tie with sharp movements. "There's no one here to perform for." "I'm not pretending. I'm doing my job." "Right. Your job." James poured himself scotch. "Sometimes I forget that's all this is to you. A paycheck." "That's not fair," Isabella said, anger flaring. "You're the one who made it about money. You drew up a contract with payment terms and behavioral clauses. Because that's what you wanted. Clear boundaries, no complications. Then why are you angry?" "Because the contract says one thing, but the way you looked at me Thursday night said something completely different." James set down his glass. "You were going to kiss me. And I was going to let you. And that wasn't in the contract, Isabella. It was a mistake." "Was it?" "Because it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like the first honest thing that's happened between us." "Don't do this," Isabella whispered. "Don't complicate this. It's already complicated." James's voice rose. "I spend my days thinking about you. Looking forward to Thursday nights like they're the only real part of my week. And I know I shouldn't, I know this is supposed to be temporary, professional, clean. But it's not. Not for me." Isabella's heart hammered. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that somewhere between the fake wedding and the real Thursday nights, I started caring about you. Really caring. And I don't know how to pretend I don't anymore." The confession hung in the air, dangerous and beautiful. "James, we can't," Isabella said, even as part of her wanted to close the distance between them. "The contract." "Screw the contract. I'm not talking about the contract. I'm talking about you and me, about what's actually happening here." "What is happening?" James crossed the space between them. "I think I'm falling for you. And I hope, you might be falling for me too." Isabella's mind reeled. This was everything she'd been afraid of. But she couldn't deny it. "I am," she admitted, the words cracking something open in her chest. "I'm falling for you. And I don't know what to do about it. Maybe we don't do anything. Maybe we just let it happen. See where it goes. And in 3.5 months? When will the contract end? Maybe you don't walk away. Maybe we will renegotiate." Isabella stepped back. You're talking about making this real. An actual marriage. Would that be so terrible? It would be complicated. There's a 13-year age gap, completely different backgrounds, and we started as a lie. Isabella wrapped her arms around herself. If we try to turn this into something real, someone will question it. And when they find that contract, we destroy the contract. We tear it up and start over. It sounded so simple. So possible. I need to think, Isabella said. This is a lot. I know. Take all the time you need. But Isabella? The feelings are real, regardless of how this started. At least for me. For me too. But I don't know if that's enough. That night, Isabella lay awake while James slept on the couch, both maintaining a physical distance that felt meaningless now that emotional boundaries had been crossed. She'd done the one thing she'd sworn she wouldn't do. She'd fallen in love with her fake husband. They flew back to New York in tense silence. When they arrived at the penthouse at 4 p.m., they found Carolyn waiting with a man Isabella didn't recognize, late 50s, expensive suit. We have a problem, Carolyn said. James, this is Richard Blackwell, head of Drake Industries' legal team. Isabella's stomach dropped. Richard opened his briefcase, pulled out a folder. We've received notice that someone is investigating your marriage. Anonymous tip to the board, suggesting the relationship might be fraudulent. The room tilted. Who? James demanded. We don't know yet. But the tip included specific details. The rushed timeline. Mrs. Drake's lack of social media presence. Questions about her financial situation before the marriage. Richard's eyes moved to Isabella. The tipster suggested she might have had financial motivations. This was it. The moment everything fell apart. We're required to investigate any credible allegations of fraud related to the inheritance clause, Richard continued. If we determine the marriage isn't legitimate, James loses the inheritance. There would likely be legal consequences for both of you, fraud charges, potential criminal prosecution. When do the interviews start? James asked, his hand finding Isabella's. Tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. I'll need to speak with each of you separately. After Richard left, Isabella and James stood in stunned silence. Carolyn cleared her throat. I have a theory about who tipped them off. Patricia Ashford called me yesterday, asking pointed questions about how you two met. My aunt, James said, disbelief in his voice. She's trying to destroy my marriage? She's trying to protect you, Carolyn corrected. She wants to honor your grandfather's wishes, making sure you're actually married for love. If she suspects fraud, she'd consider it her duty. So what do we do? Isabella asked, her voice hollow. You tell the truth, Carolyn said simply. The truth? Isabella laughed bitterly. The truth is James hired me to be his fake wife. That we signed a contract. That I was desperate and he was desperate and we made a deal. That's part of the truth, Carolyn said. But it's not the whole truth, is it? Somewhere along the way, it became real. The question is, was it real before you signed the papers, or after? Isabella's mind raced. You're asking us to lie about when we started having feelings. I'm asking you to examine whether the timeline is as clear as you think. Is it possible you started caring for each other before the wedding? That the contract wasn't the beginning, just a pragmatic element of a relationship that was already developing? Isabella thought back to that first day. The way James had looked at her with curiosity instead of contempt. I don't know where the performance ends and reality begins anymore. Neither do I, James admitted. But it's not all fake. Maybe it never was. After Carolyn left, they sat in silence. We could run, Isabella said. Fake our deaths, start new lives in Argentina. James smiled despite everything. Why Argentina? I've never been. Seems nice. They were deflecting. But finally, James said seriously, I need to ask you something. When did you start to care about me? Really care? Isabella thought about it. Remember the first Thursday night? When you invited me for pizza and a movie? I think it started then. You were just yourself. And I realized I wanted to know that person better. That was 6 weeks into our marriage, James said slowly. Which means it happened after the contract. Unless, James said carefully, we were already starting to fall for each other before the contract. We just didn't recognize it yet. Is that true, though? Or is that just a convenient rewrite? James walked to the windows. I've been thinking about that day in the hotel suite. When I saw you asleep in my bed, I thought you looked peaceful. Content. And then you woke up, and I saw this fierce determination in you. This strength. He turned to face her. And I thought, this is someone real. Someone who might actually see me instead of my bank account. If I'm being completely honest, the contract was as much about protecting myself from falling for you as it was about solving my inheritance problem. Protecting yourself from this, James said, gesturing between them. From actually falling for someone. The contract made it safe, boundaries, an expiration date. Except it didn't work. Because I started falling for you anyway. Isabella's eyes burned. I'm terrified. Because if we tell the truth tomorrow, the whole truth, we lose everything. I know. But I'm tired of lying. I'm tired of pretending I don't care about you. James took her hands. I love you, Isabella. I'm in love with you. And if we're going down tomorrow, I want to go down telling the truth about that, at least. Tears spilled down Isabella's cheeks. You can't love me. We barely know each other. I know you hum when you're concentrating. I know you kick off your shoes the moment you sit down. I know you're fiercely loyal, brave enough to sacrifice yourself for your family. James wiped away her tears. I know that Thursday nights with you are better than any business success. That's enough for me to know I love you. I love you too, Isabella whispered. I've been trying not to, because it makes everything complicated. But I do. James kissed her then, not a performance kiss. A real kiss, desperate and honest. When they pulled apart, the world hadn't ended. Their problems were still there. But something fundamental had shifted. So what do we do? Isabella asked. We go to the meeting tomorrow. We tell the truth, all of it. We show them the contract, explain how it started, and then we tell them about falling in love. And if it's not enough, then we face the consequences together. As partners. That night, Isabella called Grandma Rose and told her everything. The contract, the lies, the money. Her voice shook as she explained. Silence on the other end. Long, terrible silence. Then Marcus spoke. Izzy, that's the most insane thing I've ever heard. Also kind of badass. Marcus. Grandma Rose's voice was sharp, but then softened. Baby girl, you chose your family over your integrity. That's not a choice anyone should have to make. But I understand why you made it. Now you need to save yourself. Tell them the truth tomorrow. After the call, Isabella felt lighter. Like the weight of lying had been crushing her without realizing it. They spent the rest of the evening preparing, gathering evidence of their relationship's evolution, finding moments that proved their feelings were real even if their beginning was contractual. We're building a case that feelings existed alongside the contract, James said. That it wasn't either or. It was both. The next morning, they arrived at Drake Industries' legal offices at 8:45 a.m. Richard Blackwell met them with 2 other lawyers. Before we begin formal interviews, is there anything you'd like to tell me? James looked at Isabella. She nodded. Yes, James said. There's something we need to show you. He pulled out the contract, all 67 pages. Richard's eyebrows rose as he read. This is a marriage contract. With payment terms, behavioral clauses. He looked up. This is exactly what the tipster suggested existed. Yes, Isabella said. It's all true. James hired me to be his wife. I agreed because my family was desperate. We signed papers and spent 2 months performing for society. Richard's expression was unreadable. Then this is fraud. I'll need to report this immediately. Wait, James said. There's more. Keep reading. Richard found the addendum they'd added that morning, handwritten, signed by both. Addendum to marriage contract. As of week 6, both parties acknowledge that genuine affection has developed. As of week 8, both parties acknowledge being in love. This contract is hereby declared void not because it has been fulfilled, but because it no longer represents the true nature of our relationship. We are not business partners pretending to be spouses. We are spouses who began as business partners. This is highly irregular, Richard said, studying their faces. We started as a contract, James said. That's true. But somewhere along the way, it became real. We fell in love, not because we were supposed to, but because we spent time together and discovered we actually liked each other. Convenient timing, Richard noted. The morning of the investigation. We've been figuring this out for weeks, Isabella said. But yes, the investigation forced us to confront it, to name it. Sometimes it takes facing the loss of something to realize how much it matters. Richard was quiet, studying the documents. You understand that the board might still see this as fraud? That the existence of an initial contract could be enough to void the inheritance? We understand, James said. But we'd rather tell the truth and face the consequences than keep lying. Even if it means prison time? Even then, Isabella confirmed, though her voice shook. Richard set down the papers. I'm going to tell you something I probably shouldn't. Patricia Ashford isn't the one who tipped us off. James frowned. Then who? Ben Rosen. The lawyer who represented Mrs. Drake during the contract signing. He filed an anonymous report because he was concerned about Mrs. Drake's welfare. He thought she might have been coerced, that the power imbalance between you was too great for genuine consent. Isabella felt her heart sink. Ben had been trying to protect her. Can I speak to him? Isabella asked. Explain that I wasn't coerced? He's already given his statement. But Mrs. Drake, Isabella, I need to ask you directly, with no one else in the room, did James Drake coerce you into this marriage? Did you feel you had no choice but to agree? Isabella thought about that day in the hotel suite, about the desperation that had driven her decision. No one held a gun to my head, Isabella said carefully. But I was desperate. My family was days from being evicted, my brother needed insulin we couldn't afford, my grandmother was sick. James offered a solution. Was I coerced by circumstance? Maybe. But not by James. He gave me a choice, explained the terms, and provided independent legal counsel. If I'd said no, he would have let me walk away. Would he have? Richard pressed. Yes, Isabella said with certainty. Because that's who he is. He doesn't take advantage of people. He solves problems, even other people's problems, even when there's no benefit to him. Richard made notes, then looked at James. And you, Mr. Drake. Why hire a wife instead of just finding someone to date? Because I was terrified of exactly what ended up happening, James said honestly. I was afraid of developing real feelings. Afraid of being vulnerable. The contract was supposed to protect me from that, make it clean, transactional, temporary. But it turns out you can't contract your way out of falling in love. Richard was quiet for a long time, reviewing their documents, making notes. Finally, he looked up. I'm going to recommend to the board that this matter be closed. Isabella's breath caught. What? Your grandfather's will stipulates that you must be married in good faith, Mr. Drake. It doesn't specify that the marriage must begin with romantic love, only that it must be genuine, a true partnership entered into with honest intentions. Richard tapped the contract. This shows honest intentions. You are both clear about your circumstances, your needs, your expectations. And this addendum, combined with my observations of you two today, suggests that genuine affection has developed. That's enough, in my professional opinion, to satisfy the will's conditions. But the contract, James started. The contract shows you are taking the marriage seriously enough to establish clear terms and protections for both parties. If anything, it demonstrates more care than many traditional marriages. Richard smiled slightly. My own marriage started as an arrangement between families. Took us 3 years to fall in love. But we've been married 30 years now. Isabella felt tears streaming down her face. They'd expected judgment, condemnation, prison. Instead, understanding, empathy, a second chance. There is one condition, Richard added. That contract needs to be destroyed. Not just voided, actually destroyed. As long as it exists, someone could use it against you. Can you do that? Yes, James said immediately. Absolutely. Good. Richard stood, extended his hand. Congratulations on your marriage. I hope it brings you both the happiness your grandfather wanted for you, Mr. Drake. After the meeting, they stood in the elevator descending from the legal offices, both too stunned to speak. Did that really just happen? Isabella asked finally. I think so, James said. I think we just told the truth. And the truth was enough. They reached the ground floor, stepped out into the Manhattan morning, bright and clear and full of possibility. James took Isabella's hand, intertwined their fingers. So what now? Isabella asked. Now we go home. We burn that contract. And then, he stopped walking, turned to face her on the busy sidewalk while people streamed past. Then I'd like to propose to you properly. No contract, no lawyers, no desperation. Just me asking if you'd like to stay married to me not because you have to, but because you want to. Isabella laughed through happy tears. You're proposing when we're already married? I'm proposing when we're already in love, James corrected. The legal paperwork is just details. That's possibly the most unromantic romantic thing I've ever heard. Is that a yes? Isabella stood on her tiptoes, kissed him right there on the sidewalk. That's a yes. I'll stay married to you, James Drake. Not for money, not for security. Just because I love you. Just because you love me, James repeated. That's enough? That's everything. They went home to the penthouse, not to separate suites, but together, as partners, as spouses, as two people who'd stumbled into love despite every logical reason not to. James built a fire while Isabella retrieved the contract from his safe. 67 pages of legal terminology, payment schedules, behavioral clauses, all the terms they'd needed when they were strangers making a deal. Last chance to keep it, James joked. In case you need proof you married me for my money. I married you for your money, Isabella said honestly. But I'm staying married to you for everything else. They burned it together, feeding pages into the fire one at a time, watching their contractual arrangement turn to ash. The relief was palpable, like shedding skin that no longer fit. When the last page had burned, James pulled Isabella into his arms. Hi, he said. I'm James Drake. I'm a workaholic billionaire with control issues and a tendency to solve problems with contracts. Would you like to have dinner with me sometime? Isabella laughed. Are you trying to restart our relationship? I'm trying to do it right this time. James? We don't need to start over. What we have, all of it, even the messy parts, that's our story. And I wouldn't change it. Not even the part where you fell asleep in my bed? Especially not that part, Isabella said. Best mistake I ever made. Second best, James corrected, kissing her. The best one was saying yes. 1 year later. Isabella stood in the kitchen making popcorn the old-fashioned way. It was Thursday night, their sacred tradition, though these days it felt less like an escape and more like just part of their life together. You're going to burn it, James said, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. I never burn it anymore. You burned it last week. That was your fault for distracting me. James kissed her neck. How was I distracted? You know exactly how. Marcus emerged from the guest room. He stayed over most weekends now, taking full advantage of the game room. He was 16 now, taller than Isabella, thriving at the private school James had insisted on paying for. "You two are gross," Marcus announced. "Also, when's the pizza getting here?" "I'm starving." 20 minutes, James said, not releasing Isabella. Grandma Rose appeared from the library where she'd been reading. She'd moved into the penthouse 6 months ago. Her health had improved dramatically with consistent medical care. "That boy is always hungry," Grandma Rose said fondly. "Isabella, did you take your vitamins today?" Isabella exchanged a look with James. They'd been waiting for the right moment to share their news. "About that," Isabella said, turning off the stove. "James and I have something to tell you." Marcus looked up. Grandma Rose's expression sharpened with curiosity. "We're pregnant," Isabella said, and watched joy explode across her family's faces. Grandma Rose burst into tears. Marcus hooped and high-fived James like they'd won something. And Isabella stood in the center of it all, overwhelmed by how much her life had changed in just over a year. She thought about the girl who'd fallen asleep in a billionaire's bed, desperate and exhausted and out of options. She thought about the contract they'd signed, the lies they'd told, the performance they'd maintained until it became reality. She thought about her parents, about the love that overcame every obstacle. About how sometimes the most unlikely beginnings led to the most beautiful endings. "You okay?" James asked quietly while Marcus and Grandma Rose talked excitedly about baby names. "I'm perfect," Isabella said honestly. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. In my kitchen, burning popcorn? In our kitchen, making a family with you." James kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. "Best mistake I ever made, hiring a wife. Best decision I ever made, falling asleep in your bed." Outside the windows, Manhattan glittered with its usual chaos of lights and noise and millions of individual stories. Somewhere in that city, other people were making impossible choices, taking desperate chances, stumbling into love when they least expected it. And in a penthouse in Tribeca, a former hotel maid and the billionaire who'd proposed a fake marriage sat down to Thursday night pizza with their family, planning for a future that had started as a lie and become the truest thing either of them had ever known. The contract had been destroyed. The performance had ended. The real story, their story, was just beginning. And it was better than anything they could have possibly scripted. The mathematics of poverty had once been crystal clear: work hard, sacrifice everything, still come up short. But the mathematics of love? Those numbers never added up in any logical way. $500,000 had been the price tag on a fake marriage. But the real marriage, built on Thursday night pizzas and almost kisses, on shared honesty and mutual vulnerability, on choosing each other every day despite having every reason not to, that had been priceless. Isabella had walked into James Drake's hotel suite as a desperate maid with $287.43 to her name. She'd walked out as his wife, his partner, his person, worth far more than any contract could quantify. And somewhere in between those two moments, in the space between transaction and truth, between pretending and feeling, between what they'd agreed to and what they'd become, they'd found something that no amount of money could buy. They'd found each other. And in the end, that was the only mathematics that mattered. Looking back on Isabella and James's journey, from a desperate contract to genuine love, what strikes you most? Sometimes our greatest loves begin in the most unexpected ways, born from impossible choices and unlikely circumstances. Have you ever found something real in the most improbable place? Have you ever had to choose between what's right and what's necessary, only to discover that the path you feared most led you exactly where you needed to be? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how your own impossible became possible, how your own fears transformed into faith, and how you found love when you least expected it. Thanks for watching and anticipating another interesting story we will be bringing across your way. Do well to subscribe to this channel to stay hooked in and not to miss out on every interesting story we share.